to welcome you, Shalini, to Tech at the Table. Thank you for being our guest. How are you today?
Look, so much looking forward to this, Roy, and every conversation with you has been fun. So today, doing it over this platform, let's see what we come up with.
Right. I feel like we've had this series of incredibly interesting conversations. This one
That's
we're
true.
we're going to capture, and the rest of
Yeah,
them we'll remember them. Hopefully, we'll capture more of them going forward. That would be great. That would be great. So you're over in Bangalore right now, which is or Bengaluru right now. Weather is good. The monsoon has started. Excellent. We have a bit of a monsoon here in Texas too. I know you're connected with Texas.
that's
Tell me a little bit
correct.
about tell me a little bit about your job, what you do as a professional, and then we'll kind of dig into our topics for today.
Perfect. Um, I always think of my job and my career journey as this my genuine interest of solving a problem worth solving. That always kept me
Oh.
up.
Hmm.
Um, and I think technology has been a great co-pilot in this journey, and I think I absolutely love solving that with people, great people. So I've always had that privilege. So similarly today, I think I have the opportunity of running all of our India operations for an organization called Planview, which I belong to. We are into work and portfolio management, really helping organizations drive transformations. And I have an amazing ringside and sometimes driving side view of how change really happens in every organization. So it's an amazing journey so far.
So you're leading, you're a what they call a GCC leader, as I understand. So you own the footprint outside of the core headquarters. Describe that just a little bit for not all viewers are familiar with that concept, and I know you're very advanced in it. So describe that a bit.
Yeah. Um, Maybe I'll go a little bit off track here, Roy. I think GCC has its own definitions, and each organization has their own DNA of creating GCC. If I just describe what we're doing in Planview today, so Planview, like any global organization, has a hugely global footprint, and India today is at the nerve center of being both. Strategic talent center for almost every function, every operation, every geography. So we essentially support and become like a microcosm of all of Planview across all products, businesses, services, functions. So, is that a definition of a GCC? Maybe. But in my mind, I always think of myself as a core part of Planview and our teams. So,
Right.
while it's headquartered in Austin, Texas, but what we do here is truly service the entire global customer base of Planview.
Yeah, it's a little like an operating system kernel and extended services. And it's
Exactly.
confusing which is the kernel and which is the extended services. It depends on the model, right? Exactly. Okay, that's and because of where you are, I know you're in the middle of AI transformation. You know that I stalk your LinkedIn all the time, and I'll get all kinds of interesting, it's inspirational. Honestly, it's incredibly the way you articulate, your thinking is excellent. So for everybody who's listening, stalk Shalini's and connect with Shalini because it's excellent. So, but as a GCC leader, you're in the middle of the AI transformation. It's happening. So maybe let's start there and talk a little bit about what that looks like. Maybe even what it was like 3 years ago versus what it looks like now. What that looks like as a leader for you.
Sure. I think if you take the 3 year ago vision, right, while AI has been there, as you and I know, for a long time, but
It
it
has.
was truly the whole digital movement that has taken over for the last decade or so, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And digital movement is probably had two versions. One is just pure digitalization. There are still so many industries and
Hmm.
sectors which have not even fully been digitized, and that's a reality. We
Yeah.
talk as if the entire universe is digitized. It's not.
Well,
So
we're
there
tech
is
people. We have to. We're visionary. Of course we do. Yes.
there is that version where the whole digitization itself has been a
Right.
massive effort at a corporation level, at countries, right? I mean, even
Yeah.
just within India as a nation, the movement that we took on, just the whole payment interface, how we digitized for the entire population of 1.5 billion people. So I think that's been first phase of the journey, and through that a whole host of transformation has happened.
Right.
And then the second version became, which is a more progressive set of industries. use this digital to start looking at what more can I either connect, automate, pivot using digital. And I think AI has just accelerated the whole thing. That's kind of how I see it. And when
Hmm.
I look at my own seat as a GCC, or in the middle of this ecosystem, I see probably two, three perspectives, Roy. One is just within Planview, because of the opportunity we have to work across so many sectors. I certainly see how this transformation is happening, whether it's in a banking, financial services versus a automotive versus pharma, very, very different. At the
Hmm.
same time, massive amounts of change. The rate and pace has absolutely sped up. But when I think about ecosystems like us, where we are operating within our parent organizations, I think what has given each of us as this India center heads and anywhere globally centers running, helping service the corporations, what's happening for us is AI has become a beautiful tool and framework to really take some of these bottlenecks that we carry sometimes in legacy organizations in a very different way, which is always used to happen. We could be the blueprint for experimentation, but now this has given a very, very interesting way of doing this without sometimes almost being non-invasive. So the experimentation phase has really become much, much easier, and the fail fast truly is becoming that. So I think a lot of that is very positive, but any of this is absolutely disruptive and a change. So more to talk on that, but that's what I see right now.
Well, right now I'm putting you firmly on the side of AI optimist. I am. I'm an AI optimist. I think it enables us to do a lot more and a lot more quickly. I like the idea of non-invasiveness. Maybe I'll come back to that. That's interesting because you're right. It's not necessary. You get to experiment and work outside of mainstream at times, and then introduce change in a more orderly way. Even though it's disruptive, it helps you with that. That's fascinating. So, okay, the one thing that I we picked up on when we've talked before, we've talked plenty of times, is one of the things that AI does. It does many things, but one of them it does improves quality of decision making, bringing decisions into different places in the organization. All of that is, I wouldn't say it's democratized, but it's definitely distributed. And you've coined or have promoted a phrase called decision intelligence, which we know, but you talk about it very eloquently. So let's talk about that a little bit and dive into that as we get going here.
Sure.
Have
So
you
when
got a
I
little?
think about,
Are you good with the
yes,
network? Network working for you? I think we're both green so far.
just in one second. Yes, I was okay. I'm okay.
I'll pace it.
So
Okay, let's talk. Okay.
sure. I think decision intelligence, right? I mean, the reason why I thought about that, uh, what I'm seeing right now is few things happening. When we think of AI, while we talk of, I think the some of the keywords that everybody starts using when you think of AI and usage of AI in an organization is speed,
Mm-hmm.
productivity,
Right. Right.
uh, through of course automation is probably just a step for it, but speed and productivity are probably two of the biggest themes that come up, right? And of course data. So
Mm-hmm.
when you think about all of this, these are still means. So while we are increasing speed, or let's say if you look at specific functions, clearly engineering as a function, or marketing as a function, some of these functions are absolutely highly heavily um, somewhat accelerated and definitely disrupted with AI being used, where there is speed that's coming up. But what we also see is this speed is for certain activities within that value chain or life cycle. It
Yeah.
is really still not impacting the final decision making, which actually has to lead to an outcome. That's
Okay.
where I see disconnect, right? So that's on speed. On productivity, again, productivity gain, while it's one of the most beautiful outcomes you can chase, you're still chasing a business outcome. You're not looking for productivity gain to be an outcome, right? It has to be a driver, it has to be an enabler to drive a business outcome, which is again somewhat disconnected today from how AI is being used. And when you put these two things together, what is really coming out is um, ultimately AI is democratizing the layer of how much information is in whose hands. In the past, organizational structures the information was somewhat source of both power and control.
It was.
And
It was
I think you're
decided.
right. And I think today that is really disseminated because how technically evolved we are, how systemically we have built our organizations. When information starts getting distributed, but still remain disconnected,
Hmm.
your decision making is still somewhat in the hybrid of centralized and decentralized. Ultimately, the decisions are not getting sped up. And if that's not getting sped up,
Yeah.
productivity is not speeding up. Where do you drive outcomes? And you may be increasing the volume of activity you do, which is the bunch of outputs that you're producing,
Yep.
but the outcomes that you really want, are you reaching it, right? This is where I see the whole paradigm of decision intelligence. What do you do? And while AI is both a disruptor, it can be an accelerator, but it's still a tool. And how do you do it really remains on how do you build your organizational ecosystem, and it's like a living organism. So that's where I feel it's decision intelligence essentially means it's you have to really think of it like a living organism. And how do you evolve your intelligence framework? It is
Yep.
not just a set of activities and set of tools. It really has to think about connections, inciting, and how does that actually drive decisions.
Drive the ultimate outcome. I do see that. Like there's the old metaphor of speed versus velocity. At the end of the day, you need to
Mhm.
get somewhere with it. And you do see a lot of and there are many terms around AI, but there's a lot of thrash around AI in many organizations, especially when it gets democratized quickly. People use
That's
it,
true.
and the quality of the work is varied, the connection across the work is varied. So I see that too. Do you think any industries, I mean, again, we talked about it earlier, different industries are at different paces. Is there any vertical that's doing it better? What do you see out there in the industry in terms of the
Yeah,
evolution of this, right? Do you
and
see?
that's very valid question. Before I hit the industry thing, probably one framework to think about as decisions, right, is you have different types of decisions. You have what you call as operational decisions. I do A and B, what needs to happen C and D. So those operational decisions, I think they're definitely both speed and velocity are getting highly energized and accelerated by AI because they're almost rule bound and fairly um, um, systematized. Then
Right.
you have these tactical decisions, right? Which is where somewhat the middle management team sits in many organizations. I think that is where the real fight is happening today of
That's the action is,
conflict.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah, where do humans, where do AI, how do the systems work with each other? And then there are strategic decisions where majority of the AI is still to get there. It is where things are being surfaced for folks to take strategic decisions. But again, their frameworks, such as where is centralized versus decentralized, how are those all those information bubbling up? Those challenges still remain, right? So I want to just put this framework forward before I get into the sectoral answer,
Okay, that's
because
very.
when this becomes interesting when you have highly regulated industries
Mhm.
where it is not just about operational decisions. You have compliance sitting in almost strategic, tactical, and operational. And in operational layer you could still speed up and leverage a lot of AI because you have compliance framework set up, but you start getting into a zone of judgment, a zone of discretion, which is tactical and strategic. That is where you start seeing difference in how AI is incorporated or even institutionalized. It may be incorporated in pockets, but institutionalization becomes harder. So BFSI has always been a fairly progressive industry in adopting digitalization, open banking and all the good things. I think
Mhm.
there definitely you see a whole leverage of AI. But again, in what functions? I think you still have those functions which are heavy on operations, getting a lot more of this. But when it comes to true intelligence, true proprietary, where it
Mhm.
is used to surface decisions, but again, it's humans which are driving it, right?
Which are you
But
making this?
when it comes to, let's say, pharma, life sciences, where the regulations are much heavier. But at the same time, leverage of AI, I definitely see because we work across multiple pharma pillars. We work with med devices, we work with generics, we work with biologics. And it's very interesting. They are definitely looking at leveraging, and they've been actually a long proponents of AI. They're not new to AI, classical AI, and they really use data, huge amounts of data, to number one, I see reduce the whole drug discovery time. That's a use case I'm seeing very frequently. And you still have the critical path of what do you do with the regulator, but what you can do before that, a lot of that can be leveraged AI.
Right.
So you see such examples, right?
Interesting. Like I think I love your I like your three tier. I think in threes or sevens, but three tier makes complete sense. And the different maturities. Again, in life sciences, pharma, they have been working with AI for decades in a sense, and they're more mature. It's very interesting. Do you think regulators, just an off-road question a little bit, from a regulation point of view, regulators accepting AI in the system, is that different by industry? Do you see that? Do they tell me what you see there?
I mean, this is definitely what we hear from our customers very
Mhm.
regularly. I think accepting AI generated data, accepting AI generated conclusions, accepting AI generated testing. So I think what does AI generate and what is the acceptance? Both are different based on the regulations.
Mhm.
So for example, if you have to, and irrespective of which phase you are using, whether it is for testing, data generation, or code generation, the standards that the regulators have set up has not changed. Nobody's changing the standards to accommodate on who is producing it. Is it the human versus AI? But what is happening is when there is an AI generation, I think there are additional steps to be incorporated in terms of identifying traceability, identifying auditability, identifying transparency, because the
Right.
black boxness of AI, especially when it gets to agentic, it's not so much AI from analysis standpoint, it's really when it comes to agentic, I think
Mhm.
it's still evolving. It's evolving very, very much. And I think the um, opaqueness that comes in with agentic, I think there's a lot of pressure and expectation out of not just the people who are building models, especially the vendors who are using these models to build solutions. I think this
Mhm.
is where the responsibility of how do you
Right.
build traceability and editability, transparency, where do decisions sit, who is accountable for decisions that are coming out of these,
Yeah.
a lot of work is going on there, Roy.
Yeah, and it has to, right? That's the only way we can actually adapt, and you can only because otherwise AI will stall out in some of the regulated industries. They have to have that transparency. Must
Absolutely.
be, must have. Okay, so we're talking, and I think so. We're talking about the decision framework, and we've touched on connection across the teams and how that speed or the activity turns into outcome. And we've also touched on data. So let's get into that territory a little bit. There's another phrase that I've kind of gleaned from you called connected work, which I'm using at work all the time, where we take our AIs and our humans and we go up that pyramid of decisioning, and we do that in as efficient a way as possible to get to the outcome. Can you describe it in your words, because I think they're more educated than mine, and how you're applying that in your life and in your work and what you see in customers?
Um, I think of connected work or connectedness in any of this
Yeah,
as a pre-AI and post-AI. If I think about the differences, right, there's a big shift. When we think of connection, we generally think of integrated systems and things like that. But I kind of in my mind, it's one level above, which is if any work that you do, irrespective of which organization, which industry, or a government or a country, essentially, if your work is connected, you have a smooth, seamless flow of decisions, dependencies being mapped,
right.
and you actually have the context moving alongside these decisions. That's your
Yes.
ideal state, right? Because
Hmm.
you're not, Roy is not just telling Shalini, this is decision, go get it done. That's when systems break. When Roy tells me, or a system Roy versus system Shalini is talking, and this it's coming along with decisions, with dependencies, which is where bottlenecks happen, and context moves alongside, that's connected. That's
Yeah.
connected work, right? That's kind of my own personal definition of how I think of connected work. And when
Hmm.
you, before we go down the path of what does connected mean, think about what happens when this level of connection is not there.
Hmm.
So you will get into, let's say, somewhat ghost decisions. We spoke about it, where you have choices have been made. That's where strategy happens, planning happens in an ivory room, 10 people off sites.
Yep.
And then there is visibility into either they do not have the entire visibility of downstream impact, or the ones who are executing do not have, understand. That's a typical strategy delivery gap. Second, that could happen is you could be optimizing for wrong things. At a
Yeah.
team level, you could be optimizing for your efficiency and productivity while degrading the entire system performance. But at a higher strategic level, the optimization is happening for something altogether different.
Completely different. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That could be another. Think of um, this is classic. This is kind of where the decision intelligence comes into picture. So there are insights that are coming up, bubbling up from bottoms up because a lot of activities, a lot of data, a lot of systems.
Mm-hmm.
There are strategic bets being taken, but by the time these two actually meet and align, there is a decay that has happened. Either the insights have become stale, or decisions have reached a stage where the pivot becomes harder.
Yeah.
And amidst all of this, one of the biggest things we see is accountability gaps, because we realize that you've got to be cross-functional, cross-geographical, cross everything, and then people don't know who won the outcome. So the reason
Yeah.
I'm bringing these things up is, which means each of these need to be connected. It's the systems, it's the people, it's the outcomes. So it is not about having a host of data and everything connected with thousands of fields. That's not the answer. The
Yeah.
answer is, do you know the critical outcomes? Do you know what are the critical decision attributes that need for those outcomes to become successful? That's what needs to get connected. So that's kind of how I think about connected work as a system. And when you bring in AI, what happens is, pre-AI, disconnected meant a lot of these and inefficiencies. But post AI, imagine applying an autonomous or an agentic AI into this kind of an environment. It can be catastrophic. It's not just inefficient.
At a minimum, chaotic, but it could be catastrophic. That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
So I think that's why this becomes even more important in this era.
One of the things what's triggered here is like there is clearly shared data under this. You talked about that earlier. We always talk about that. We have to be looking at the same or a connected data set. We have to all have access to that, which is a challenge in a lot of organizations. But shared context is actually everything, right? Shared the connection between data and context so that we don't lose gaps top to bottom or across. Imagine, you're right, like in our business, we're dealing with technology data. We try to have the definitive, up-to-date, real-time view of what's in your environment. But imagine agents executing across that environment without that. Imagine one group having a different version than the other. The context changes, right? Not just so. Let's dive in maybe a little bit into context, because I think context is as a core determinant of connection is very interesting. Very, because most companies don't have it. They don't have a definition of context.
It all lies here. Today, context is in
Yeah,
here.
yeah. It's whatever you believe your context is. It's human. It's very human. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Um, Very interesting. I think I love the fact that as a technologist, I love the fact that people are actually talking of context as a technology element, because I always felt that was such a critical thing. It felt like it was one of the softer things, never a harder thing. But today, we have industries building context graphs. For me, that brings joy as a technologist, because I think that's the real thing. But when you think about it, that's the hardest thing, right, Roy? I think context can mean many things, but
Yep.
that's something we are also exploring, like many other tech organizations. Context cannot be just generic context alone. It has to be very specific to a decision you make. For example, in our domain, let's say portfolio management, if a portfolio manager is taking a portfolio decision, he or she needs to have context on why this decision was made from the bottom layers in a certain way, why this decision was made from an external context. So it's very specific to that business domain. That's one thing I want to attribute. Context is not generic.
Not. It's
While
very
there is,
right.
right, while there is a unique context that everybody brings, like you and I would have our own personal context coming in, but when you think of a business system, it's that specific activity needs that business context. That's number one. Second is, within an organization, for example, we talked of regulation in the past, right? think about it when you have a business context where you're driving towards revenue growth, and when you have a regulator context, which is a huge compliance set of compliance, when these compliance context and business context don't come together within an organization,
Very typical.
they
Yeah.
both have context, but that is the conflict that is happening today. Whether you take a bank in a risk management system, or whether you take a drug coming out to the market. So these
Hmm.
are very specific context you need to have, and a connected context, which means it has to have, again, drive back to the outcome.
Yeah.
The third is when you think of a data element, how do you drive context into a data element? I think there are interesting models out there. People talk of how do we attach history of how the decision is being made. I think that's the most straightforward way of people attaching context. But again, it's sometimes the history may be wrong. There was a wrong decision taken, wrong context. So how do you so I think those are things which are still getting built, but I'm excited with the concept of building this context graphs into the knowledge graph, so that there is a real holistic way of thinking about it.
Hmm.
I also know that there's a huge push of thinking of all of this like your human brain, and human brain always carries context with every decision. It's easier said than done. I don't think we can really replicate it as it is. That's just a personal opinion. But uh, to summarize, in my mind, context has to be very specific to that decision. Context has to be connected, even within an organization. And third is context can have probably two layers. One is an organizational context. Second could be a very specific user context. But they need to meet at some point as driving the right decision and outcome.
Well, when we solve that, we're going to get a lot closer to things like we will solve a lot. Like even in the, and we'll go a little future here, even in the world of AGI, it's massively important. These are the, so have you thought about that? Like I'm interested. Have you thought about AGI and how things change? We're not, depending who you read and depending where you're connected, we're
Yeah.
not that far away from those moments, right? In the different areas. Have you thought about that?
I do. And interestingly, recently on my Netflix OTT feed, this old show, I don't know if you have seen this, called Person of Interest came up.
Oh,
Uh,
I
remember
don't.
this,
I've never watched it. I haven't
this,
watched
this,
it.
okay.
Okay. Like
This
everybody.
show probably happened. It's a fictional show, of course. It happened, I think, around 2012, 14, that age. The reason it came up is it all talks of this AGI type of a sentient system which is doing surveillance and giving out decisions, etc., etc. So the reason I brought it up is clearly it's on mind. In fact, I was talking to my teenage son. He talks of a sentient system.
Hmm.
So I think this is a conversation happening across generations. But when I think of AGI, right, there is a there is anxiety and excitement. That's kind of what I would call it.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah.
because excitement, because what it can unlock when done well is just humongous to the humanity. Beyond the business activities that we're talking about, there's truly largest humanitarian impact that it can have. I was watching this I think deep think, right?
Yeah.
That was a show. Thinking game. That's a show about deep mind.
Yeah.
Um, and what we did with the whole mapping of the genome, I think some of those, when I think about it, AGI feels like the right next answer. But the anxiety comes not from the usage or misuse of it, but anxiety comes from what we somewhat feel we are giving up as human beings. Because are we stepping away from our critical thinking? Are we stepping away from how we have learned? Because I think we have, okay, my belief is our cognitive systems are built for learning. Our human cognitive systems are built for learning. When you hit hard things, when you work hard at it, and that builds
That builds
deeper,
your. Hmm.
deeper neural pathways, are we giving that up? Or are we really elevating our higher order thinking? Those are the more
Yeah.
fundamental foundational questions that happen to me, but technologically it does feel like it's fairly close. And that's exciting.
It is exciting. The potential is huge, and many of the things you've talked about in our little chat here, are important elements to getting to that correctly. If that's when that's deployed and when that becomes something that we have to deal with in a business context or in a personal context, many of the things you're talking about, connectedness, in the way we make decisions, the way we share context, has to be there. Otherwise, I think we're in a state,
Absolutely.
be a very much a state of chaos and disruption, and or beyond that. Yeah. Okay. Fascinating discussion. We could talk for hours. Let's tie it up a little bit. So, from a closing thoughts point of view, and you as a leader, you as a global leader, in all of this discussion in this domain, what would you leave our viewers with in terms of advice, in terms of things to think about, areas of discovery? What would you leave them with as a concluding thought?
I would I would really probably leave it with a couple of thoughts. One is let's stop looking at AI as a tool. Um, I think that's the most important thing, which means it just unlocks the seat that we give
Yeah,
this air in our ecosystem. It number one. Number two, being connected not just within your team, your organization, your industry, your country. I think we have to really go global, go networked. The organizations will have to turn into a lot more networking organization structures, because that's when I think true decision intelligence can be achieved with AI, because AI is built that way. AI is not built hierarchically,
it's not.
which essentially means we have to adapt to that, right? That's probably the second thought. And I would also leave it with a small practical tip. Almost think of, this is something which I'm starting to experiment. Think of what are the 5 or 10 most important decisions you have to make, whether it's for yourself or for your work, for your team, etc. And start probably doing some sort of an audit and think of who owns those decisions,
Hmm.
what are the context it's missing because of which this is probably not happening enough, and how long do they take, what does it really make to happen. Because when you start thinking that, I think we start simplifying our structures, and today the only reason why we can't reach where we can't reach is because of the complexity we have built, and some of it probably going to be intentional. I think important to have that understanding, how much is intentional versus how much we should avoid. That's
Hmm.
just an experiment I would leave the audience with.
We have gone from AGI to very practical advice. I love this. This is fantastic. And I'm going to do this. I'm going to take it into my organization. I'm going to do this tomorrow. We're going to start. I love that advice. I think that's an infinitely practical, and you'll learn a lot. I think from those of us who are working with AI day to day, I think that's a really good thought experiment and practical experiment. So awesome.